our conclusions as expressed better in the book. So I will not go perhaps into detail in this moment and leave open the detail for the questions after that. So it's very much of an overview. So the project initial title, it was a little bit different from the book outcome, and was very much conceived out of my own research, primarily about European communities' relations with the socialist countries. And so we wanted to look into the other side, primarily in terms of their views and relations with the European community. But then that got bigger because, of course, we were fully aware since inception that we wanted to plug this into the wider political and economic reality and the incipient process of globalization at the time. So it ended up to be a little bit broader than we had initially planned. So these are just few information about the project, and which ended in last September. So what we started from was what we knew about in terms of Cold War, so that there is a difference between the détente among the European states and the détente between the two superpowers, and that the European détente is what we were interested in. So this web of contacts, exchanges, trade, some treaty obligations, the CSE process, various layers of interactions, whether it is bilateral or multilateral cooperation, various actors also involved. And so we started from these main premises, and we wanted to add to our knowledge of this process, which was peculiar to Europe. In terms of economic and business history, there had been a lot of research in the 70s and 80s at the time of indeed this terrific web of exchanges about cooperation between some enterprises, so very much at micro level. But then that has not, let's say, led to a trend of research. And then in terms of the history of communism, we know, of course, that we knew the socioeconomic reasons behind socialist countries' decision to engage more with the Western countries. And we know that modernization and reaching higher living standards was a key priority, particularly in terms of guaranteeing the political stability of their regimes. And when I say regimes, it's in a neutral sense. We also know that, thanks to fantastic research, and this idea, very much American idea, that was a Soviet monolithic bloc is not true. And we started from the point that, of course, we know that the reforms and the import-led strategy eventually fade. That's the outcome. So we wanted to go and explore before it failed. And in terms of international economic history, what has been more interesting in the latest years has been this attempt to consider that globalization, that these countries were not insulated from the globalization that was, proposed by the West and other, let's say, global economic phenomena of the time, which again had been very much in Western literature as something of a given or an assumption. And then in terms of European integration, well, particularly I have shown that there was a specific Ostpolitik of the community as such, but it was also important to us to assess how the others perceived the repercussion of the Western European integration process, how they were impacted by it, and so which actions they intended to take. So our research questions were very much intended to bring to the fore the European socialist regimes part in this European and a little bit global scenario, the situation. And so what we wanted to investigate was what were the regime's expectations and predicaments about this East-West cooperation and trade, this multilateral space of cooperation in Europe in the 70s. How they approached the question of dealing with the European community in particular and its impact on their economies. And but particularly, we were interested in who in the political and economic elites. So we were focusing on the decision makers and those, you know, at various titles involved in the decision making and policy making, who advocated higher levels of East-West economic exchanges and who were against taking this path or at some point become concerned with it. So eventually we also, that was not at the beginning the intention, but eventually we added also considerations about why their strategies in action did not work in the end, because we were, and I'll come back to it later, but we were not happy with this idea that the Western-led globalization process was so fantastic that it wiped away everything with it. So we thought that it's a little bit simplistic, to say the least, and also try to find out when it became evident to the elites that their strategy had failed. So not to us historians to place some dates, but when they became aware of the shortcomings and failure. So what we did was to focus, we wanted very much to focus on the European socialist countries, not on the Soviet Union, and we excluded this because there was already quite a lot of research about the Soviet ongoing or already published about the Soviet attitude towards the European community and Western Europe. And you know, we have Mikhail here, who's very much also contributing to that scope of research. And because we were interested very much in the small, medium-sized European states and how they try to conceptualize their role and their place in this European continent, which we were sick of seeing as depicted only as East against West and so on. So we thought that the Soviet Union was important to acknowledge in how these countries' elites considered their relationship with the Soviet Union, their latitude for maneuver, but we wanted very much to explore their latitude of maneuver, and so not involve the superpower, and also because their economic necessities and strategies were different from the Soviet ones. So it would have been quite the odd man out in a sense. What we wanted to, I mentioned this, we wanted to investigate was the decision makers. So we focused on the elites, and I identified other categories, let's say, because many studies focus on the party or, you know, the state and the party, and we found that was also a simplification, particularly in the West. There is Western literature and American literature, there is a tendency to state that the party decided all, and we wanted to not necessarily run against this, but to bring to the fore again the different roles within the decision-making machinery, and possibly find out that ideas circulated, and you know, it's not just the level of the final decision or the tempo that the party members or the Politburo could give that matters. So we focus on the state apparatus in a sense, different ministries, different layers of it. We brought in the experts and academics' views, and we also wanted to look into the managers of the socialist foreign trade enterprises, which were those affecting the relations with Western countries and their business, and the central bankers, because we assumed that they would have something to say about the strategy and the possibility of indebtedness, for example. And so what we explored was the debate within each elite and the debate across the elites in each country. We initially thought it would have been interesting to look at possible cross debate across the different countries, but there was a lot to ask to our team, so we dropped that. And so the research is more comparative in a sense than transnational. And the period is the long 70s, which you know, I don't need to explain here why it's interesting. But we kept the end year, let's say, open because we assumed, and indeed we found out that it varies across countries. So these are the subfields of historical research that we aim to contribute to. And what we wanted to do was very much to have multidisciplinary, in the sense of history, approach. So to bring in methods or the questions from international history, political history, economic history, and business history as well. Very much to link this separate scholarship on Eastern Europe and Western Europe, very much, which was the roots of the project. Indeed, and to highlight, as I said, new features or peculiarities of European detente. So to continue to build this literature about a process that was typical to Europe and almost nothing to do with the superpowers' own relations, which were much less stable. And again, to challenge the idea of a monolithic socialist bloc and the idea that these countries were satellites of Moscow with no capacity to autonomy or, you know, decisions on their own, to challenge the idea that only the communist parties mattered into the decision making, the policy making, and finally to bring to studies on the European community specifically and its process and development, the perspective from the outsiders, because there has been a tendency for decades to just present this process as something good for everyone and good for the continent. And this is not necessarily the case. So this presence was affecting badly the economies of the outsiders. And so possibly finally to reveal the longer term paths of recombination, let's say, of European countries into what is now a very enlarged European Union. So by bringing their perspective, by bringing their stories into the picture, and not just talking about the EU enlarging and absorbing and so on. So our outputs are the book that we're going to focus on, several articles and chapters by the team members on specific aspects that they were more interested in or closer to their own sub-discipline of expertise. My monograph, which actually was the beginning of the project, which is going to come out on the EC policy in general towards these countries, and an interactive map which can be used also for teaching purposes, presents the specific actors involved. And if you're interested, we can have a quick look at it. So our conclusions as presented in the book and about related to our research questions. So the first was what expectations and predicaments these countries' elites had about foreign trade and cooperation. So we found that all, of course, were, this is something that was already present in the literature, were interested in supporting the strategy of import-led growth, so acquiring Western technology in order to modernize or achieve a higher standard of production and more intensive production, and then leap forward, of course. But we also found that this is a moment in which these elites are in various degrees, but all of them, with the exception of Romania, perhaps, interested in higher standards of living for their citizens, in satisfying very much their citizens. And this is both ideological and for the stability of the regime. So ideological in the sense that they believed that was possible, that was the goal of the socialists. It's a different view from Western consumerism, of course, but the satisfaction of the citizens' needs was a priority for them. Then, of course, these strategies was that they would take loans, they would enter into indebtedness, but they will repay through more exports, and so eventually catch up. We found out more interestingly that some of these countries' elites were also politically motivated in terms of gaining more autonomy, either political or in the economic decisions. And this, of course, is the case of Yugoslavia, which is on Comecon, and there was in the 70s a specific decision to connect more with West, and as a preservation of the non-aligned status in case the Soviets would try to do anything against Yugoslavia. But we also found, we know about Romania, of course, but we also found a very interesting attitude of the Polish regime, in the sense that in the sense that the Polish regime is very much self-confident in the 70s. There was a plan to make Poland the 10th economically stronger country in terms of output and modernization and so on. But there was also very much an idea that Poland, a socialist Poland, was a European country and had to all the capabilities and should contribute to the European, let's say, system of relations much more. And so they see Poland's place in this pan-European space as second to Moscow in terms of political relevance, which is very ambitious. And then we have countries such as the GDR, which might seem obvious, and Bulgaria very much in the 70s, pointing to using this opening to the West or encouraging more relations with Western European countries as a way to acquire more visibility at the international level and to enlarge their relationships. The predicaments were pretty common to every regime. So the idea is that this is all good, but there is a visible danger of catching the capitalist virus, in the sense that they should really pay attention to control how these relationships were forged, how the exchange would take place, and in particular, how the population would perceive this. So in terms of the specific open to European community, what we saw was that there is a starting point common to all these regimes, and it is their assessment that the European community is a protectionist entity and is badly affecting exports towards Western Europe. And this is a massive problem because of the strategy of import-led growth. So they need to export more, but as the European community deepens its own integration and establish new competence in different economic sectors. So first there was, of course, the agricultural sector that was already present, but then there is the common trade policy, so deciding the amount of Eastern goods that can come in, and so posing barriers to their exports was very much passed into the EEC competence. Then there is fisheries, then there is steel. So bit by bit, sector by sector, is the European community, the Commission, that is going to establish the rule, the quota and the tariffs, not the member states. And so that is a big problem, given the fact that, as you know, none of these countries recognized the community until the late 80s. So although this is the assumption, the assessment that all of them make, the specific strategy or policy varies across countries. So the Yugoslavs in particular and the Romanians come to see the EEC as a possible partner. So because of this, it's better to try to establish and forge relations that are mutually beneficial. And again, they see this also as a political partner to gain more room for maneuver, or a sort of additional external protection from Moscow should the Soviet decide to try to curb any autonomous actions. Other countries, those were more export-oriented, so Hungary, Poland, and Czechoslovakia, so the EEC as a reality to deal with. So whether we like it or not, it's there and it's there to stay. And all the theories, and in this, the academic debate is particularly relevant and interesting. All the debates about capitalist countries eventually coming to clash are revised in this period, because it's not working like that. So the EEC shows that capitalist countries can actually cooperate and grow together, which doesn't delete entirely the competition, but it makes it work in a sense. And then we have two absolutely staunch positions from the GDR and Soviets that the EEC should not be recognized per se. The only relations with the Comecon could be established eventually. And this is because they had no need to recognize it. So the Soviet exports are not affected by EEC common policies, and the GDR are affected by it. There is, at the very least, the German trade, which is not foreign trade and is not affected by the EEC. So they have some latitude to still avoid forging any sort of relations with this thing. And then we have Bulgaria, which is probably the most interesting case, because there is a slow evolution from this position towards, well, actually we need to strike some deal with this entity, even if we don't recognize it officially. So what we have is that Romania tried to establish direct contacts as much as possible, just short of official recognition. And they don't want any Comecon EEC agreement that might discuss trade, because that would curb a national economic policy, as seen from the Romanian perspective. The Yugoslav, of course, are not bound to the Comecon, so they go straight to fully recognize the community, and we have several important outcomes out of that. The other countries adopt a wait and see position, so they support EEC Comecon agreement, but at the same time, they progressively get into other strategies, tactics, to try and challenge the barriers that the EEC is placing via international organizations they are involved in. So all of them but the GDR use the GATT. Those who were already members, those who asked and become members at this period. Bulgaria also tried to use the UNCTAD, and Romania the G77, because Romania claimed the status of developing country. There's a type. So the GDR is the only exception because it doesn't plug into any of the international fora and its sense. And then this strategy doesn't really work very much. So only at that point, all the remaining countries strike sectoral deals more and more with the European Economic Community as they need, but again, the GDR and the Soviet Union. So who was behind these decisions? We found that there are differences across the elites, and there are differences across the sectors involved. So the Ministry of Defense, Interior, and Intelligence Service were very much concerned, at the very least, or utterly against, openly against, because they saw, of course, the interdependence as dependency from the West eventually, either by indebtedness or because of equipment, and so that wasn't really much, as they saw it, likely to be able to. Very much likely to be able to lead towards some sort of capitalism contagion or Western ideas contagion in the citizens, but also the way of organizing production and everything. So they were kind of arguing against or constantly trying to put some limitations to this policy. The Ministries of Foreign Affairs and of Foreign Trade, in the different layers, were very much in favor of contacts with the West. And this is also perhaps because, they stood to gain from it in terms of their importance in the state apparatus. The foreign enterprises, the foreign trade enterprises, the managers of this, and the academic elite were hugely in favor. So most of them were in favor, and we found that this is because they also stand to gain from this, weren't they? So they had their own agenda in terms of aggrandizement of the enterprises, or in terms of what they would gain more in terms of the plan, and the academics in terms of their possibility to actually do their job and share ideas and so on. So there is a little bit of a personal agenda, and that is usually not very much considered in these studies. And then we found that the bankers, so the central bankers and those in charge of the foreign trade foreign investment bank, were either quiet or warning about the indebtedness trap. So they were not very vocal in terms of the old policy, but they did see the dangers of it from a financial point of view. So they were not very visible or active, apart from the GDR and Hungary, where they issued very much warnings all the time. As for the party, the most interesting thing was we found, and this is particularly visible in Hungary, is the generational differences. So, of course, the old generation in party and the state apparatus as well usually were more cautious or concerned, while the younger party people were in favor because either they wanted to reform socialism and make it work better, so they were less dogmatic and attached to how things were done in the past, had been done to date, or in some cases, in some at the fringe, maybe again the Hungarian example is peculiar in this. Some were thinking, particularly in the early 80s, about liberalizing socialism to a certain extent. So there are some Westernizers that we can see emerge. So what we saw, and I guess it was the most, at least to me, the most exciting bit of our findings, is that there is a lot of circulation of ideas among elites, and there is a lot of input in the party final decisions from the other elites, from the lower levels of the state apparatus, or from outside the state apparatus. So the idea that these are not monolithic party-centered regimes was very much confirmed, the hypothesis that we had in mind. So why the strategy did not work in the end was, as I told you, not the main focus of our research, but we found that it would have been limited not to contribute to this discussion, given our findings. So the mainstream arguments when we started the project, so many things are going on, thankfully at the moment, is that the socialist economies will never work, and that's they were doomed, and that's it. And we think that it's not so simple. We see variations across countries, and we think that there is not enough time to see the end point. So maybe if for other reasons these regimes had not been challenged by the people, there would have been a possibility to reform the regimes and so on. So we don't have an answer, because again, that's not the purpose of the project, but we are very unhappy about a view that immediately state, that this would never work, because we didn't see all the attempts or successive attempts and their endpoint. But this is, of course, one of the most contentious issues. we definitely did not like the idea that they were wiped away by Western globalization. The current research is showing very much that there were several attempts at red globalization, for example, or into shaping this globalization process. And so what we agree to is that is the view that they were caught in a double squeeze. So the Soviet, let's say, incapacity to absorb, let's say, the Western, their exports, their production, and on the other side, the crisis in the West. So the strategy of modernizing and export more and then repay the loans and have a wider share in the global economy was blown away, not because they were doomed, but because of the circumstances of the time that they couldn't foresee. So the oil shocks, the Western crisis, the Western economic crisis, and the inability of the Soviet Union to provide at that point, to subsidize heavily as they had done previously their economies. And but the thing that we very much wanted to challenge was this idea that they did not understand finance and that they blindly got into the debt trap, sorry. And we found that this is totally false. So there is a lot of debate about this. There is a lot of debate since inception. There are voices in all these countries arguing about this danger. And so the idea that they should continue has, according to each country, another explanation. It's not because they didn't see it coming. It's not because they didn't understand it. Of course, they had economists of fantastic expertise. So, but that's you have to think that we come from Western countries and are imbued with Western literature. So these were the narratives and the mainstream narratives that they very much wanted to fight against. So finally, we can add some knowledge to when it became evident to the ruling elites that the strategy had failed. And it varies across countries. So also gathering all these countries together in, it's the end of the 80s, it's mid 80s, it's the 70s. It's a little bit simplistic. So for example, just put two, we see in Poland, it was already evident in 1980, of course we know that, but in the GDR and Hungary, basically with the risk of bankruptcy in 82 in the GDR and with Hungary, taking IMF loans in 82, it's already evident that they cannot do without the Western support and financial support. And we say that the impact of the external factors is common to all, is very much massive. So whether there are still problems with the socialist way of organizing the economy and production and so on, we're not neglecting that or denying that, but we wanted to highlight that the impact of what was going on externally was equally, at the very least, important in explaining the failure of their strategy. And so again, is the globalization, is the evolution of the AEC and how much this is impacting on their economies and their strategy. It's the oil shock, the Western economic crisis, as already mentioned, and the Soviet economic stagnation. So this is basically the double trap they got caught into. But if we look at the national economic strategy and the actions taken, so we can explain better when it failed. So it's very much nationally motivated and explained. So this is the overview. It was a lot, but I wanted to bring the merit of the huge research effort of the team. And so in the question and answers session, I'll answer any question about details or anything else. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Angela. Do you want to ask question now, or we will hear the presentation of Mikhail Lipkin first, and then we will discuss both presentations and both projects, and so the common problems. Mikhail? We didn't hear you something with your micro, so.
Yes. Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, yes, Alexei. Hello, Angela. Hello, Oscar. Artem Akopich, very nice to see you, and all the rest who can hear us. Thank you very much for organizing this seminar. It's really very interesting, and my full respect to Angela and to the team from the Florence, which ended such ambitious, complex, and very useful project. And really only now, because I remember there was a special issue of the journal I read, but the book I believe is much more interesting to read and I think that we will order it and read also in our institute. Here I can represent, just say a few words. I didn't prepare some, a presentation actually about the project which started I with my colleagues from the Institute of World History of the Russian Academy of Sciences in 2017. A bit later than Angela. And this year is the last year of our project. We prolonged it for 2 years, so it will be 5 years on. And of course, it's hard to say what we did all in all, but just speaking about printing things besides, of course, a variety of articles and a variety of papers and seminars. So we set up a special series of books in Russian, by now at least, unfortunately. So the first one was a book by, let's see, Vyacheslav Nekrasov, who unfortunately left the group several years ago. It deals mostly with the Khrushchev times and his ideas of reforming, reshaping the Soviet economy with some links to the Cold War era. Then appeared my book, and this is just our major cover, and this is our major series of the project, which is, by the way, called The World System of Socialism and Global Economy. We took the period mid-50s, mid-70s as the most interesting and the most turbulent and the most active and promising for this project at the time. And we looked at the evolution of theory and practice of Soviet leadership from the point of economy and technology. And so this became, I think, the only one monograph, at least in Russia, on what Comecon was till the end of 1970s. So I didn't dig the documents for 1980s. It's another interesting story, which I think we will do further in time. But this was the basic book, and the idea and how it is called. It's called the Comecon Historical Experience of Alternative Global System, of Alternative Global World System. So this represents Comecon not only just as only continental thing, only Eastern integration, which is within the continent, but about these ambitions and about the role of all those countries which became so they were not members, maybe full members of the Comecon, but they had ties, they had joint committees, they had other interesting frames which appeared especially after the adoption of the complex project of the socialist economic integration in 1971. And these various forms of cooperation with Comecon and various forms of getting some assistance, help, aids from this organization all around the globe, of Africa, Latin America, etc., is, I think, the angle which little people looked before at this organization. And of course, we look at the Comecon as the economic heart of this world system of socialism, though we know that within the system of socialism, there was the inner Cold War between, for leadership in the socialist world, between Moscow and Beijing. And then the second book came out from this series. You see the same colors. in the same series. It's about just in the title the same name as our project on the world system of socialism and global economy. And it's a collective monograph where almost all who participated had written their chapters. And it has, of course, both the link to technical things, to ideological baggage, which allowed to talk about how creative Marxism can bring new, fresh ideas for reforming the economies of Eastern Bloc, Eastern countries, and those members of the Comecon we're talking about. It's more wide than just the history of Comecon. For instance, one of the angles we look at, written by Timur Jalilov, tell us about how generally this so-called Eastern Bloc, which I agree with Angela, was not so monolithic at all, but still there exists this community. So how policy making was done there with such pillars as the meetings of the top leaders of the communist and the parties, the Comecon as a great, huge forum, not only for economy, but much more about it. And there was a pact where there was a political committee, and of course, where not only purely military things were discussed. So this is a new story which we started within this project to study about, I think, a few years ago. So there is a special chapter by Timur Jalilov about this, and we will have actually a special panel on the ENIUC, European Network on International Global History Congress, which will be this June online. It's announced like it is in Finland, but actually it will be online, yes. And I organized the special session with Suvi Kantsikas and with Timur Jalilov, with Irina Geeva, especially on these pillars of the Eastern Bloc and discussing on them. And of course, one of the landmarks, I think, of our project was this huge and interesting conference, international conference in Moscow, dedicated to the Jubilee of Comecon, where Oscar was, where Angela was, where Alexei was, and Arne Vestet and Ladislav Zubak and Yakov Fagan. And really, we didn't know, no one expected the COVID to happen, but it was really very good that we succeeded to do it before. And we exchanged a lot of ideas and literature and etc. And of course, so it was done also in this fantastic building of the Comecon in Moscow, as well as historical place. So this is what I think we're famous for. And by the way, one more book will appear in this series, in the same cover, dedicated to, so it will be, we call it a monograph in documents, but really it's documents, commented documents, which we were lucky to get from the party archive. And it will be a fantastic record of the meeting of these top party bosses in January 1956. So it's just the post-Stalin review, reshaping and criticizing themselves, by the way, of those leaders, which later, you know, the 20th Congress of the party, the Stalinization and everything else. So this meeting somehow just is not very well known. But if we talk about this vision of the world system of socialism and about this new, fresh, more frank ways of dealing with satellites from the point of Moscow, from the point of Soviet Union, this relaunching of this socialist oikoumene, which happened in 1956. This is a very important thing, and we will be the first to publish it aloud. Also in Russian yet, but I hope sometime we will publish something in translation in some English book or series or something like this. And speaking about our discoveries, it's of course so long to talk about. So I think we were the first one here in Russia to start just very, very, very teeny way, but to start the talk about the link between the second world and the third world. And of course, we were inspired by the project by James Mark and the book they published in the end about alternative globalizations. But we are more grounded on the archives, and we really have fantastic archives here. Yet the party archives end in mid-70s, but the economic archives are more better, in more better shape, and really we want next year to apply for a new huge project dedicated just concretely more about this contacts with the third world and these ideas to relaunch and discuss this globalization project from the point of the socialist countries, socialist leaders, thinkers, not only Soviet project, by the way, as we see it now. So we hope that we will go to 1980s and start to serious talk about 1980s, because by now, I don't see anyone here in Russia, perhaps by one exception, it's Rodolphe Pichoy from the Institute of Russian History. But I know he is working, but still didn't publish anything yet. He really works hard on the reforms, economic reforms of 1980s. No one else, because the archives are very, so for 70s, more or less okay. For 80s, only economic archives still can you tell something. But of course, without party topping of them, so we can start with some hypotheses, we can start with some discussions, which we hope will move our archive keepers to declassify more in this, you know, direction. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we're doing now, and that's what we have done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. So let's come to discussion. And the first point that I want to start it from is that the project of Angela Romana and links with Mikhail's project and maybe with my project and my team, we are trying to understand the motifs of economic cooperation intra-Comecon. And for me, the Angeles and project, I will Pan-Euro 70s project, main question is that that your conclusions is about 70s. And when you talk about that socialist camp was not so monolithic from the studies of, sorry, something wrong with university. In your conclusion, you indicate that there is no so monolithic, and different countries has national strategies for international with the West. But in the 50s or 60s, in my opinion, they also has different strategies with the relation with West and the Soviet Union, and also with the global South. And they was in a situation of competition with each other inside the Comecon, and inside the Europe is a global object. So they was in a situation of competition in India or in Africa or for the Western markets. So when we talk only from one point of view, I mean, with how East European countries try to construct relations with the West or with the Soviet Union or inside Comecon, we still limited from this point of view, and we can reconstruct the full picture, full situation. What do you all think about the idea of more wide circulation of this concept and of implementation of wide context of function of East European economic relation? Now, maybe one thing, in my opinion, you know, the process in 70s was not forced by the only Cold War as a political or ideological force, but mainly from the economic.
Can I interrupt? Can I interrupt just a second? I need to take a call because it's
okay.
from so I really apologize for that.
Yeah.
I'll be short. Thank you.
Sorry. What about the context? I think we will wait for Angela.
Or if you think I can comment.
Okay. Professor Holden, yeah.
Yeah, I'm from the National Archive of Hungary, and I was also a participant of this project. And I would comment one point, if you agree, by Mikhail Lipkin, when you mentioned this January meeting in 1956. I believe it is a crucial point. In Hungarian archives, we have a Hungarian protocol of this meeting. And also Csaba Békés, and also I quoted this meeting in some publications, in book which I wrote about the military cooperation inside the Comecon. I also quote that meeting, and it's really that point when Khrushchev and the Soviet leadership shows that something has to change in the model of the Comecon cooperation, and the leading sentence from Khrushchev is, there is a lot of parallel development in the social camp. So what would be done if all Soviet republics would produce the same things? So he used this point to show that have to change the model of the entire Comecon cooperation. So it's a really important point in the history of Eastern cooperation, in the history of the Comecon. So I totally agree with you in this point. So it would be really important to publish this protocol of this summit. And to your question, Alexei, I would say that nearly from the mid-50s, we can say that the socialist camp has one voice. So the smaller countries, the so-called satellite countries, follow the Soviet standpoint regarding the European community. So in many points, they just, I would say, really strictly followed the Soviet standpoint. But from the first years of the 60s, like 62, 64, or like this, Hungary, Romania, and many other countries has discovered that they have national interest. And this is the time also in Hungary when the Ministry of Foreign Trade and at some point the party center formulates a new idea that Hungary has had national interest, and Hungary should build new lines with the Western countries, including Brussels, including the common market. And from this point, it's we can say the smaller Eastern countries will have, or would have, their own face, I would say. They have, they formulate their own standpoint, and interesting how the smaller countries like Hungary or Bulgaria or Czechoslovakia tries to find allies inside the Comecon when they want to make reforms inside the bloc when they want to formulate new policies towards the Western countries and towards the EEC. So this is the way how they found the 70s, which our book is about. But this is the pro story or the earliest story of this point, I think. So that would be my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry, I deeply apologize for that, but the health system in this country is crazy. So if I didn't take that call, I would have waited several weeks to know about my things. So sorry about that. I'm glad that Pal came in, which was in any case intended. So as far as I could hear while also talking on the phone, Pal already pointed out, so we were interested in the 70s, not because, and we never wrote that, we thought that nothing happened previously. There was no competition, no differentiation, or no national policies before that. It's written nowhere in the book, and we never assumed that. We're focused on the 70s because that is where that is the moment when the European community becomes a problem, and when there is a debate in the Comecon about how to deal with this thing. So that was very much where the project came from, the relationship with the community and this pan-European space that was opened up by the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe. And of course, the 70s are very transformative in a sense and intriguing, as Michael was pointing out, because all sorts of things happened that were not anticipated, for example, in globally and in Western economies and in the socialist economies as well. So yeah, there was absolutely no intention to deny differentiation before. And actually, personally, I think that you know, détente itself started much earlier. I always point out particularly to US focused research that in Europe, that thing started before the superpowers, more advanced relations. And indeed, if we look at the Western nations, it was Churchill already in the 50s that was saying we should relaunch all sorts of contacts with the Soviet Union and the other countries in terms of economic exchange, cultural exchanges. This, you know, this divide is nonsensical. So we have security concern and alliances, that's fine, but it shouldn't hamper all other sorts of relations. And starting from that, there is, you know, all sorts of. So I would say what we saw, the only latecomer in establishing these contacts with the West and starting very much to be more proactive in the 70s is Bulgaria. The others had already started, but the big difference is that that was country to country, not country with the problem of the European community. They could ignore the European community until the early 70s.
Yeah.
You had another question, I guess. Yeah, I wanted very much to agree with Alexei. We do have partial views. So I was particularly grateful to Alexei when we discussed before this workshop, and I would like to open this to you all of you to listen to your views. So we discussed the fact that our research has been partial in a sense that we only focused on the relations that these countries' elites wanted to shape with Western Europe in particular, and you know, the community. We didn't, on purpose, examine what they were doing with the Comecon, within the Comecon and so on. We brought into the picture their considerations of their own relationship with the Soviet Union, but only limited to how much they were concerned that their strategy could upset their relationship, how free they managed to be. But we didn't explore and didn't want to explore all the cooperation that was going on and relaunched in the Comecon at that time. So I am a little bit concerned about some statements that we make in the conclusion when we say that, and I would like to see your views on that, because all of you are contributing on those parts of the pictures, of the picture. When we say that we noticed in those debates that by the end of the mid-70s already, the idea of expanding in the South, so of cultivating the relationship between the East and the South, was kind of abandoned in practicality. So the emphasis, the rhetorical emphasis was still there, but when we look at the actual exchanges, they are reoriented. It's pretty visible that they cannot export to the South as much as would be convenient. There is a ferocious competition there from the Western countries, but also now from the South Asian countries. And so what they need is to export more to Western Europe. So when we say there was a reorientation towards Western Europe, it's not to say that Comecon doesn't count anymore, but that there is a major shift that is noticeable that was not present earlier. And the South, and this idea that the East and the South was an alternative, that doesn't seem to hold true by the mid-70s and moving forward. But again, I am absolutely aware that we saw a lot of documents, but not all of the documents, and we were not asking the specific questions. So I would like to hear more from your perspective and your research. How do you see the connections very much between these three circles, I would say? So the Comecon, the South, and the West, the Western Europe, from the Soviet perspective or the other socialist countries' perspective?
Maybe Mikhail, about Global South. Have you know?
Well, very
Oscar.
I see as a hypothesis very interesting one that in the 70s, and I'm not speaking about the Soviet Union, even more about the member countries, the most active of them, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, in some cases GDR, in some cases Bulgaria, pushing for this move to the third world, because it was seen not from the ideological point of view, as mostly it was under the Khrushchev times, but as a rather pragmatic choice when they saw that they have difficulties in expanding their export-oriented strategies to the West. They tried to diverge it and to balance with their trade to the South. And there was some logic under it. And it's just still a question why this strategy failed. One of the ideas which I have, that's because of this weak financial wing of socialist integration and of this world system socialism project, because they still failed in these discussions, and they didn't make a single currency as they could. And it could become a reserve currency, by the way, if they did, but they failed to. They had very little bank abilities. They had some funds, they gave some credits, but waged with the Western funds and Western credits was very, very teeny things. And even though a lot of interesting discussions and ideas and etc., in the end, because I think, maybe because on the one hand, it was more, in the moral terms, I think, more done in a spirit of this internationalism, Marxist, things to build a rosy future for everyone. And when you compare the technical assistance, as it was called in the socialist bloc, and aid programs, as it was called in the Western. So of course they were not so rigid. They were not in hard currency. They gave a lot of floor of different things favorable for the third world. And actually the third world was in favor because of this competition for its markets between the West and the East, and flourishing and from it. And but as for the socialist bloc, so in the end, they all were in debt, both to the West and to the South, you know. So it's a peculiar situation. And when, how it happened, and when this, you know, the point of never ending happened, which was this date. So that's still what we're looking for. I still don't have, you know, clear answers myself.
Oscar, no? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have questions, and I just wanted to comment slightly on Angela's question. And it's not from my own work, but from that of Max Strecker, if you haven't read his book, because what he shows, in fact, is that the 1970s is the heyday of CMEA collaboration in the third world. They're not collaborating in the 50s, they're not collaborating in the 60s, maybe towards the end. But the projects that they're making at that point are individual. They're one-to-one, country to country. Whereas what you see in the 1960s, at the end of the 1960s, and then through the 1970s, is cooperation, building Baghdad, or, you know, this still know that thing. And of course, Max gets into all this. There's a problem. I feel like there's a methodological problem to doing archives, because the problem with the archives is that the only time that they generate paper is when there's problems. So in the archives, we tend to, I mean, my book is full of this stuff, you know, I mean, it's all problem, because that's what the archives generate. When things are going smoothly, you know, no one's complaining, no one's writing a letter. Well, I'm just trying to explain sort of what Max is, what he's seeing, because what he's seeing is, you know, there's constant kind of like logistical problems in those cooperations or whatever. But there's big cooperations. So in terms of volume, if anything, the 1970s is a triumph of CMEA integration. I don't know that it's not. And I guess this goes towards a kind of larger issue that I wanted to maybe bring up, because everything I've heard here is a very kind of there are no structures in these histories. Everything is a very kind of political. It's this political strategy, it's that political strategy, there's this thinking that they were doing, there's this negotiation. Or for example, Mikhail, to your point about currency, I mean, you cannot negotiate a currency into existence, right? There's, you know, as we know, there's all these great books now about the theories of money. You can't just decree a currency. I mean, the Soviets found this out in 1917 or 1918, 1919 is when they made their currency, right? And it just, you know, depreciated out of existence within a few years. There has to be a kind of sovereignty to it. So in a way that, you know, in terms of the question of why didn't they create a currency, it might not be because they didn't get their act together and negotiate it, but because they couldn't, the Soviets in particular, who manned the CMEA, could not develop the authority to have a working currency. And you can see that all over the place in the CMEA, right? You can see it, CMEA prices were all based on the West. I mean, what kind of socialism is that? You take the list of prices from the West and then you import them into the East, and voila. And if you see the way they talk about it, it's because those are realistic values. They keep saying this, at least the Soviets. I don't know what the other Eastern Europeans are saying, but the way they talk about it is, you know, this is the only way for us to get realistic values. In other words, realistic values are the thing you get in market exchange in the West. That seems to me to speak to a kind of authority that has already been surrendered by the Soviet Union. So I feel like we need maybe more of this kind of theoretical understandings. But my main point is, structures. In other words, why is it possible to all of a sudden have all these big collaborations in the South in the 1970s, right? This is not a political decision. It's not because suddenly they thought, oh, hey, why haven't we been doing this, right? What is coordinating that cooperation? What makes it possible? Because it doesn't, I mean, this is the kind of thing that, you know, when we have, I feel like the only ones who see the world in this key of everything is a political decision, everything is dependent on political action or will, is IR political science, right? Almost everybody else in academia, sociologists, anthropologists, IPE people, I mean, within political science, right? Marxists, of course, but liberals of every kind will see structures, for example, financialization, right? Like that's a structure that doesn't occur because of a political decision. It occurs because of a whole set of different dynamics, and we're still trying to grapple with what those might be. So I was wondering, is there a place for structure in either of this, Michael, your project, or Angela, yours?
Yeah. Thank you. What about structure?
Comment?
Yeah.
Comment this point?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that our project made a fresh view from this point, because as you could see in the presentation of Angela, the core point of the investigation was the trade ministries, the trade administration, the trade agencies, and so on. So because the cooperation or any policy towards the EEC was really based on the trade policy, and all views of socialist countries, maybe except the Soviet Union, was really the trade barriers and discrimination of the common market towards Eastern goods and so on. So why 1968 is the turning point in the story? Because the customs union started in the common market, and that was the point when never could say any trade agency in Eastern Europe, we don't talk about the EEC because it's just a political issue. No. This is about how to, how can you export your goods into the community. And this is about money. This is about trade policies. This is about, and the following point is the different policies and how could Hungary or Poland and Czechoslovakia recruit allies inside the Comecon, as Hungarian politicians called the EEC. The small Hungary should find friends against the giant monster of the common market. And from this point, the entire issue is a political issue as well. So not simply an economic or trade policy issue, but really a political issue. So in this point, I think it's in our book and in our research, these structures and these economic issues were really were really highlighted issues and highlighted points. And this is, so what would I say? If you check any kind of books on Warsaw Pact or Comecon or policy of Eastern countries towards the West, towards the USA, you can hardly find any sources from trade agencies or Ministry of Foreign Trade, because usually the diplomatic history is overlapping all issues of these policies. My colleagues in Hungary check the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Party Center, and so on. No one quotes the Minister of Foreign Trade because they never checked it, really. So I think this is a new point in also in international literature in our book, I believe. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just add one bit to Paul's thorough and perfect reply, is that what we don't like about IR people is very much that they treat the state as monolithic, and when they talk about the socialist countries, it's not even the state, it's the party. So what we wanted to bring forward is starting from this structural thing, and I agree with you that, you know, taking political decisions in the void, like God's deciding on playing, you know, dice with the thing, doesn't make any sense. So we wanted to, the structure Paul already talked about is AEC, but is also this process of globalization and challenges coming in, is the starting point. But what we wanted also to bring to the fore is the internal structure of the decision making in this country, which is much more diverse than the IR people or the diplomatic historians usually have it. Like, it's the party, it takes a decision because they believe in it, or because, you know, this is the vision of the leader. It's not even the party most of the time, it's just the leader. And we wanted to challenge that. So and I agree with you that the in a sense, the structural component in how this entities functioned is extremely important. So the ripple effect from the foreign trade enterprises, for example, is very important because they were the ones dealing with the other side, with the South or with the EEC. So they knew stuff. So if I were to say, I agree, structure is important, is there, but I also need to have the people dealing with the structure or shaping the structure if they manage to, because otherwise we have a partial view of processes that just go on by themselves, and this is not the case. Somebody started, somebody tried to oppose at some point. So I believe the two should coexist, and the two should serve to dismantle any view that there is one single person or one single entity taking the decision and then shaping the world or whatever it is. That is very much what you were contesting, and I totally agree.
Thank you very much. And I will continue, sorry, in maybe another direction, but I think it will be connect with your speech. So you told that the people also important, and people important in decision making, but from my point of view, I want to, you know, divide the political structure from the pragmatic economic background. If we talk about the limitation of decision making, what will be, you know, what the process will make these limits? For maybe we will, can we talk about, you know, quality effects in the East-West trade, production chains. Maybe for me, 70s, it's a great story about re-export of the Soviet oil and different oil products. So if you want to more wide trade with the West, you need, you know, develop your trade with the Soviet Union. And this means that you need more import from Soviet Union, not only oil, but you need more export for balancing the trade. So if we talk about this decision making and national strategies, how free was the actors in this decision making. Now, I mean, they have a strong limits. They have a existing structure from the 60s. From the economics point of view, if you want to move wide trade with the West, you can make a political decision, but you can't. You didn't have any commodities for trade. And for you, it's a problem. Your commodities can't be good enough for Western markets. So my question is a question about limits of this view. So.
Yeah, I guess that's what the project is about, is the visions of the strategy and the predicaments they face. So when we analyze the debate, the internal debate, it's also about how can they shape a policy, how they can, export more or something, and the limits they face. That is in the outcomes we discuss. So we're not saying that there wasn't any issues. We take the issues that they were facing and we want to see. So we knew already about this stuff thanks to other research. So we wanted to see how they acknowledged the limits. Because the beginning is bombastic. We're going to import from the Western technology, the technology we need. We're going to modernize. We're going to export more, and so on and so forth. And it doesn't work. And so we wanted to see why that is decided, but also how that is followed up. And when they face these sort of limitations, what they do. So that also, explains why at a certain point the global South markets are not paying back, so they're not able to export enough there, and so that also creates a problem which is structural. So there are, I think, Paul, correct me if I remember wrongly, but it was Pavel showed that Czechoslovakia started to differentiate the acquisition of oil because when the Soviet Union renegotiated the crisis in the 70s, so that was a huge problem because either they needed to, pay back more because of that, and that was a problem, or they needed to differentiate. So we acknowledge those in the debates we explore. So I'm not sure I understand the question. What you were asking me to bring to the fore.
Can I, Alexei, sort of sort of rephrase the question, because I think you understand it. So I think correct me if I'm wrong, Alexei, but I think what Alexei is asking, and it's a great question. But it's so what is the scope? I mean, you have all this, you had a list of all these actors. And I guess we're interested here in political economy of trade and finance. What is the role, say, of, maybe this is not all your question, I'm realizing it's not, but maybe it's part of the question. What is the role of the Interior Ministry or the KGB? Or, I mean, it seems like, when you're some trade person, deputy minister, someone in one of the VOs or something like that, your concerns are, what's the commodity chain? What price can I negotiate with this company or the state official or whatever, right? What is the input of these different actors, I guess, or is the input, is the point, I guess, of the study that the input is in the grand strategy level or something like that, maybe? Is that
okay, thank you. Is
question?
that Alexei?
Yeah, it's the second one. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, we as I presented, we never had a project which is IPE or trade and finance. So the perspective of the project should have been clear. Maybe my fault in the presentation. So it's about all. It's a multidisciplinary look in the sense of subdiscipline history to begin with. So there is the concern about political diplomatic relations, there is a concern about trade policy and so on and so forth. So our take is not, we're not examining the production chain, we're not examining only the trade policy, we're not examining that kind of level. So I understand that from that perspective, looking at the various ministries doesn't make sense, but that's not our perspective. What we wanted, if you want, I may borrow Oscar's definition of the grand strategy, but the grand strategy is what's the place these countries, ruling elite, envisioned for their own countries in the 70s, given the fact that there is a different environment there, that the detente is a reality and is there to stay, that there is an opening, that the economy at global level is changing, there are different structural challenges and so on. So we're not analyzing value chain. And I totally understand if it doesn't make sense to Alexei from that perspective, but that's not what we were interested in. So if you want, it's an enriched diplomatic history. I don't know. We don't care about just, it's, to me personally, and I guess Federico was also very much on board with this and fed up with this, to me, dealing with the European community and the socialist countries to disentangle political, I don't know, high politics perspective, Minister of Defense, whatever it is, and the economic element, that doesn't make sense, because these entities exist mainly because of the economy, and it's inherent in the socialist ideology and model, and it's the very nature of the European Economic Community since inception, to the point that we're still arguing about the European Union not being fully political, blah, 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 blah. So I'm not able to disentangle the two. We didn't want to disentangle. And again, we are interested in understanding there is an opening, there is a European detente, there are structural problems, there is a huge giant there next door they have to come to deal with. What was the thinking? And to us, the thinking is not explained only by diplomacy or international Cold War status or security and that stuff. Is very much economically explained by economic necessities and organization, but the two are related. So the Ministry of Interior, when they say this is dangerous because with contacts and economic exchanges and so on, we will get into our society more and more Western values, matters, because you could carve. So the GDR economic decisions are different from, for example, the Hungarian economic decisions, because the political situation, the security situation, and the identity situation is different as well. So that's how, but I understand that if you are interested in more structural trade and production things, that it doesn't make sense necessarily to look at what the ministry, not concerned directly with that, or the Ghost Plan, for example, people might think. And yet we do know, for example, that the Stasi had its own economic experts, and they very much impinged into the economic decisions as well. So there again, I guess, but it's not my territory of inquiry, I would have problems not to enlarge the picture and to see what other experts, economic experts in not necessarily the economic ministries were trying to bring into decisions or creating obstacle to those decisions, for example.
Artyom Mulyan, you're welcome, please, and switch on, yeah.
First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Romano for this book, and we hopefully awaiting delivery of it, of course, here in Russia, first of all. And I should say that my first words, the words of pity, because when I see that the separate work lead only to the results of our own teams. This is the old British expression, it is better to be in peg than to be strangled separately. I suppose that this old wisdom works here also. And frankly speaking, I should say, no, I shouldn't say about our teamwork led by Mikhail, because it's also very interesting, but we have decided to start with your work, first of all. And I should say that it was very interesting because you have touched upon the themes which were in the focus for a long period of time, not only in the Western historiography, but also here in new Russian historiography. And I should say 3 points I would like to touch upon, only 3, because I have a lot of them, and I understand that the members of your team practically dwelled on all they wanted to do. And I believe that they did it and completed it. The first point is about the period. It's very interesting because also in our team, it was serious discussion concerning the beginning and the end, the 2 extremes of this period. And also we decided, by the way, to start from the 50s. You took so-called long 60s, 70s. But we should remember one thing, that at the end or in the late 50s, the process of economic reform have started by different countries. First of all, of course, as you remember, in Hungary, when one of the chief leaders of the party nomenclature, Nyer, have offered this plan of reforms. Then, as you know, in Bulgaria, a lot of problems has appeared with their currency and gold awards. And I mentioned this point, not because of the internal or domestic economic problems, but the main problem was the foreign debt, as you remember, in Hungary and in Bulgaria. It was the starting point because they wrote in their documents, perhaps Professor Gormushka have mentioned in his writings already, if he participated in your team. They wrote in their writings, especially secret documents, offered to was submitted to the higher level officials, that the problem is not only the domestic one, but also the relations with outer world. And that is why I suppose that the long 70s was the continuation of short 50s, we should say. Because particularly that starting period was decisive, focal point, both to Hungary, to Romania, to Bulgaria. I have started just several, I have completed just several weeks ago the article devoted to Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary on the documents, because it was beautiful thing that, for example, Bulgarians and Hungarians also submitted their documents on internet. It is very important. And that was my first remark, that we should mention, even if we cope with, we are dwelling on the 60s and 70s, that the 50s were the starting point when the national communism, or how you call it, I don't know, but the national idea in the communist countries or something else became their, have shaped already in the form of economic independence, not independence, but less they wanted to lessen the dependence on the Soviet Union. Although they wanted to take something from Soviet Union, but to less, to a separate way to Europe, they practically have chosen. That is why this is my first remark. The second remark, by the way, concerning the lobby, you have touched upon very interesting and I suppose the most important question. When you said about those who was standing in favor of the cooperation with Europe or capitalist world, and those who was against. It is very mysterious and not so solid thing that we may touch upon. Because even in the documents, publications, it's very difficult to find out. Here in Russia, by the way, they were the representatives of the lobbyists who supported the idea of cooperation with West, or who was against it. You have, I would like to refer to your diagram. It's very interesting. When you mentioned Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior, Intelligence Service, that they were concerned or against the cooperation, I should say that maybe it's much more suitable to use the word military industrial complex. Because, by the way, although they wanted Western technologies, they were afraid of any competition, serious competition. I say about competition between Soviet industry and Western industry. And the very interesting question you have touched upon, because it is my theme, by the way. Who are those in Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Foreign Trade who supported the idea of cooperation with Western countries? I don't know whether you have seen the documents here in Russian archives in particular, although there are a lot of problems, as you know, but sometimes we happen to take some materials from them. And I should say that this is not, I suppose, although your point is something another one. And it's very interesting, by the way. It's typical two points confronting, but I suppose they are adding to each other. You say about the generation, that old generation and new generation. But my point of view that it didn't depend on generation factor. Because, why? Sorry, because you know that those who started reforms in the communist countries were not so young as we can think about them. Moreover, a lot of them have survived even the Stalinist purges, even the periods of Stalinist tightening of the regime. And it is not so easy, so simple to define only on generation problem. Moreover, it is very interesting. If you take, for example, the Hungarian and the Romanian examples, you will see very interesting peculiarities. That those who came from the different regions of the country, not from the center of the country, but from the regions of the country, are much more conservative than those who lived in the capital of the country. And when the cadre policy you take, for example, in some ways, I understand, you see, you shake the head, I understand that this is a questionable one, I understand it. But I say about the statistics, of course, the statistics is something false, but those who came from the region, from the rims of the country, not from the center, they are much more nationally oriented people than those who live in the capital. I say about those periods, not about current situation. And the third question is much more interesting. This is the behavior of the small countries, because Soviets consider themselves as the squeamish, infallibly pawnbrokers among those whom they organize in their bloc. But in reality, their concessions were under pressure of those small countries. And that is why when I was when I turned to the materials, for example, of the Netherlands, by the way, the Dutch materials on the Comic-Con are very interesting in this sense. And if you take the Hungarian materials, the Romanian materials, the Bulgarian towards the Western countries, they are absolutely different one. They are not so as you can imagine if they practically repeat the Soviet sample. It's very interesting on this position. Of course, I'm standing in favor of small countries due different reasons, but in some ways they practically pressed those global countries. It's very interesting one. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for a long speech.
Thank you very much.
I'm very grateful. And thank you very much for your observation. I'll start from the last one, because yeah, I'm very happy that you see this, because that's precisely what the project wanted to do and did. So to reveal that they're not taking orders from Moscow, and that in so many instances, the Soviet leaders or authorities or opposite numbers were saying, this is crazy, you cannot do this, and they did it eventually. So yeah, we totally agree. This idea of the monolith and the satellites, I hate when people use this word satellites, because it's not the case. And there are people here, and also Lauren Cramp, for example, doing a fantastic job in their research to show that the diversity within the Warsaw Pact and within the Comic-Con, and how much the Soviets got constrained by their allies on all sorts of decisions, and also economically. So yeah, I'm very glad that you pointed that out. On Hungary, I'll let, of course, Paul reply, and also on all the points that he wants to touch upon. The lobby, so I'm terribly sorry, in the presentation that was kind of a general overview, but the gist of the project is very much that we wanted to show the diversity and also the evolution. So the generalization, you know, the Ministry of Defense is like this, the Ministry of Foreign Trade like that, doesn't very much reveal what is written in the book and what the research is about. So the different chapters are much more complex and showing how they add, as you were saying, they add to each other's perspective. And it was a debate, so we focus on the debate. And also there is an evolution or changes in these positions over time. So even the Ministry of Foreign Trade in some countries can start very much in favor and then say, well, you know, this is not working, we should recalibrate the strategy, take different decisions. So I thank you for bringing that up, because that was the point in the presentation that really that doesn't show what it has been done. And if I can share just 1 second the screen, I wanted to show the map. So this is even more sophisticated or complete in this interactive map. So the team made an amazing job in tracing down the people contributing or producing documents or reports or inputs into the decision making. So what happens is that you can click on a country, there are these nuances, and the development of the positions of the different elites are explored into much more detail here than in the overall chapters of the book, in which in any case they are examined. And so this is completely free to navigate. And so there is an overview of the country's debate, but then we can dig into the specific elite. And so we see it had to be text, because very much we wanted to show the evolution of the different positions. And at the end of each elite page, there are key documents that we've found in the archives may better elucidate some specific positions, but also more interesting perhaps the people. So we can also go into, as you were saying, the different lobbies, the participants in this debate, and see how they influenced and added to the different positions. And this is done as a template for each of the countries we examined. So that those complexities are in the output of the projects, not in my presentation very much. So thank you again for bringing that as a question. I totally agree with you about the periodization. And again, we didn't argue that it's only happening in the 70s. Again, the 70s is because the only thing that is new is that these regimes are considering what to do with the EC at this point, which was not very much the case in the 50s and 60s. There was a position because, you know, it's false. Any assumption that they were not aware of what was going on with the Western European integration is absolutely false. They were scrutinizing it since the inception. But even in the academic debates, it's less complex because it's just started and because it's not a successful story already. So, you know, there is the idea, yeah, let's see where they go and if it goes on. Also, from an ideological point of view, there was skepticism, but you know, it's not that the Western views on these experiences were already, this is going to be a terrific success. So it was open to see. In the 60s, there is a continuity in this, because in the 60s, there is much more debate. Why? Because there is a common agricultural policy. So that's already a structural problem for most of these countries. And then it booms in the 70s when the community takes on the common trade policy, basically. So I agree with you that it started before, and the differentiation of the national ways, let's say, towards socialism are visible already before the 70s. What I would, but this is beyond our book scope, but what I would be more careful about is that there is a caesura in the 60s with the Prague Spring phenomenon. So it's more visible in Czechoslovakia, of course, with the process of normalization, but there is kind of a moment in the 60s in which the amazing reforms that had been adopted, very much national roads to socialism, are kind of not entirely erased, but there is a retrenching towards centralization, towards less autonomy given to the trade enterprises, the different managers and so on. So I think that creates a little bit of a problem in drawing the continuity. So I would agree with you that this is not the first moment. If we focus on dynamism and autonomous behavior from the allies of the Soviet Union, that the 70s is not the first moment of it. And that there is a longer history of, you know, negotiating the relationship at all, but it's a continuity with a big pulling the brakes at a certain point. And then I'll ask Pal to add.
Yeah, I would comment on the 3 points you mentioned. Starting from the last one, the small countries. My chapter has a former version when I quoted Jussi Hanhimäki, who wrote an entire chapter in the Cambridge History of Cold War, and he called the smaller European states as junior actors, which were really important in making the detente in the 70s, and they had their own, I would say, soft power or some kind of power in European politics, including Belgium, or Hungary, or such like small countries. So this has a larger literature in diplomatic histories, and I believe in this point that also the smaller countries of the Comecon, like Czechoslovakia or Hungary, or and so were so union actors in this large picture when they talked about in the Helsinki process and so on. Briefly on generation problem, I would remind that Nyers Rezső was nearly the single person from his generation who supported the or made the reform. If you check his generation, including Kardar and the Politburo members, by the beginning of the 80s, they are more or less in their 70s in their age, and what I called in my paper the younger generation, like Gyula Horn, Mátyás Szűrös, Miklós Németh, and so on. They are were in their 40s in the beginning of this period, which we investigated. And I think this point when Hungary joined the IMF and these restarted or tried to start again or tried to refresh the internal reforms, this younger generation formulated the new standpoint towards the West, towards the economic issues, towards the entire foreign economic policy, because they want also reforms inside the Comecon, which was really they were really disappointed in these times when Brezhnev and next Chernenko and so on was not able to start new wins. And this is why we ended our investigation before Gorbachev, because that's the point when something changes radically in this politics. And back to periodization and reforms again. I think, of course, Imre Nagy was and his so-called new course in 1953 when he started a new voice, and which was different from the so-called Stalinist core, and also some East European leaders who started the early reforms in the 50s had an important role, of course, because when Nyers and other Hungarian reformist politicians restarted the entire process in the mid-60s, they just go back to the roots, the anti-Stalinist reforms of 53, 54, and so on. So, of course, the problem and the entire reform period is go back to the 50s. But as we mentioned, 1968 was a turning point in our project and this policy towards the EEC and Western Europe. So briefly, I would reply in this way. Thank you.
May I just add two things that I liked very much? Did you refer to the military-industrial complex in these countries as well? And I wish we had used the expression.
Yeah. Okay, that's a long story. Soviet Union has this large military-industrial complex, but in the smaller countries we hadn't got such like. So it's a core point. Since due to the reforms of Imre Nagy, the so-called military-industrial enterprises has sometimes 10% up to 50, 60% of military production, and all the other was civilian production. So we call them dual purpose enterprises or dual profile enterprises. And this is why these enterprises and the military, so the army and the Ministry of Interior was not so strong in Hungary or in these smaller countries as in the Soviet Union. So I wouldn't say that it was of course, it was a strong lobby, but it was not a column of the power, I would say. And cooperation with the West, also the military enterprises from the mid-60s wants to get Western technologies, and this is the core point. So they pushed the ministry and the entire system that, hey guys, we had to get a modern technology because it's what we can have from Czechoslovakia, from the Soviet Union, it's not enough. It's outdated. It's not the state of the art of technology. And this is how they, if you check the investment plans of the military enterprises from the late 60s, they always have a special budget buying Western technologies, including machinery, special equipment, and so on and so on. And the highlighted point of this process when Hungary bought an entire TNT factory from Sweden in the beginning of the 80s. So which shows that in several points Hungary and the Hungarian industry depended on these modern technologies. Of course, the counterintelligence and the military intelligence followed with high interest with these contacts and these problems. And it was a special issue when, for example, the famous Videoton, who produced military radios for the Soviet Union, also for Libya, and at the same time they produced televisions with Western technologies, and Western engineers go to the factory of the TV factory, the Videoton, and how to manage these problems when Western people day by day go to the not the top secret radio factory, but to the enterprise. So this is how they face the problem of so-called Westernization or this. It was a real conflict between the politics and the managers and the technology problem, when the later one, which was defended the politics because they want new technologies. So that's my point on military issues.
Yeah, thanks. And just for, again, my bad in the presentation, but the different sectors lobbying, it's presented in the chapters and in the interactive map at the level of the foreign trade enterprises. So we got it via that. While when we refer to the ministry, it's more really the state apparatus of the ministry. It might pop up there, but there is a lot of lobbying, as you were saying, you were pointing out, from various sectors, and those who needed the Western technology or equipment were, of course, pushing for. They're also in terms of their own aggrandizement in the national economy, which is, I guess, common to the Soviet case as well. Kind of a self-interest of the sector. By the way, the book is in free to access online. It's an open access. There are no fees. So I have to check if I have also a hard copy. I would be very happy to have it sent over to Moscow. Between me and Federico might have a couple of copies because of this immediate publication also online and open access, because it's a requirement of the European Union fundings. We didn't get very much copies. I guess we have one for each team members, and maybe Federico and I have two, but we will try to sort it out. And I think we all like the physical thing better than the online one, but the online can be distributed more easily and immediately.
Thank you very much, and I think it will be great. So I think we will come to the finish, and I want one short comment from any of you about what is the intersection points for our field. So we need to discuss it, and for me important to hear, and I hope for all of you important to hear, what is the perspective of research? What do you interested in our fields, in your fields, and maybe in global context? As I understand, we can talk about the national interest inside the Eastern Europe and inside the complex relations in economic and between the political blocs. So I ask you maybe one or two sentences about the perspective of intersection. Oh. Please, Paul.
Yeah, let me ask something. So for me, in the following year, so in the next time, I would write the entire story in a book, the Hungarian EC relations. So this is my plan. But I'm also interested in more Comecon issues. And I would be interested in how do you, so is there anyone in your group or in your institute who would write about the Soviet interest in Comecon? So because we talk about the Soviet Union several times as a large monster of the East, but what was the, I would say, Russian or Soviet national interest in this entire cooperation? So we do not know about too much, I think, because so the perspective is several times is the things were taken or things were decided in Moscow and so on, that the large empire wants this and this. But in this cooperation, what was the real interest of the Soviet Union? For example, in the issue of the oil prices from 75, for example, because in Hungarian documents, we can see the harsh debates on prices, and of course the oil, the natural gas, and different machinery and so on. But what is really missing from the picture, I think, is the point of the Soviet national interest or the Russian national interest in this issue. So I would ask that, do you have any such like plan or research project which would investigate this issue in the following times? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can tell about my future project, and I hope my project will last one more year, and in the next year we will try to understand the motives of technological cooperation on Soviet territory, and we will explore the some factories as Ust-Ilimsk factory about cellulose production. And also my research will be about Soviet trade, and as a part of big link, big chain of production and connection, I inspired by idea of the poverty effects in these production chains, and occasional and accidents, and maybe mistakes which lead to changes in trade. So for me it will be important point of view, but for me very important now to understand the wide context of all these processes, and first of all economic underground maybe of integration. So and I understand that now the theme of Global South and internet relation with Global South is very important, and we have a few books on this theme. I was inspired that Max Strecker actually wanted to connect to this workshop, but I think he have some problem, and will mail to him. But Oscar, I think work with it. Yes, no, Oscar, what is your plan?
Oh, well, my plan is to finish this book and pay 5 minutes of attention to my children, so I can do that. But I mean, it's just it's a continuation of what I was doing. I just kept looking at these documents. I felt like I squeezed something out last time, and so I kept at it, and I feel like I'm trying to squeeze something out of these documents that are so repetitive. I mean, you see negotiation after negotiation, but I feel like you can sort of begin to see this maybe takes a more anthropological look at the kind of logics that go into what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And I've talked about it. I talked about it a little bit at Mikhail's work conference, and also at your workshop, Alexei. What I'm really looking at is sort of the way that the Soviets were using markets essentially to attenuate the Cold War, to attenuate this kind of Bretton Woods period in which the United States can actually tell its allies what to do, and the allies listen. So the Soviet Union is very much interested in kind of decentralizing that mode of power. And so for me, what I'm finding that's very interesting is that very much like what Angela was saying in terms of the starting points of what they wanted to do, they don't want to assume that globalization just kind of levels them or whatever. What I'm finding is that in fact they're bringing it about. They are helping to bring globalization about. And so I'm at this point, I keep a foot firmly in our camp, but I'm also trying to address those who are interested in seeing the development of capitalism over time. And I'm trying to integrate the socialist world into this story, not just as, they borrowed money and then they went bankrupt, but as an actual mechanism for bringing about financialization, which, I mean, the Soviets are at the core of it, right? I mean, the Soviets are, and the Eastern allies are borrowing left and right from the euro money, from the euro dollar market, right? And that borrowing, usually the euro dollar market is thought of as a thing that where money gets attracted to from outside, from, you know, maybe because the US is profligate or something like that, and so money, but that's not actually what happens. What happens is the more money you borrow, the more money you create. That's how the euro-dollar market works. That's how money works generally, right? And so and so a core part of that is how credible and creditworthy these countries were. Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, at first Poland, later not, Hungary, Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary, I think are three, they're in the top 10 most creditworthy nations in the world, right? More than Italy, more than Spain, more than any of these countries. And the Eurodollar market leans on that. It builds on that. That's what it, you know, and so I feel like the socialist world is not just being leveled or not just kind of tipping its toes in globalization, but generating it, helping to generate it. And they have political reasons for that. And the political reasons are clear when you look at the 50s and 60s and how the Americans are just able to ostracize the whole socialist world on their say-so. And the Europeans have to follow, and third world has to follow, et cetera. And they find a way through finance to kind of circumvent that. And so anyway, I'm sorry I gave my whole thesis away, but that's this one, and then we'll see. I guess I'll continue because at this point, I'm just a one-track mind kind of person. So.
Okay.
We're enabling the globalization to some extent. Yeah, that's fascinating. If I may, I'm so happy, but I was so happy when Alexei proposed this workshop with you, in with all of you in particular, because this is all the research that I will never do. Because it's not my expertise, because I don't know the language, and this is all the bits that I miss and I'm foolishly interested in. So Michael and I guess it was 2008, 2009 when we started, when we met, and it was a World Economic History and Congress, indeed, the panel we organized together with Kieran Patel as well. So we go quite a while back, and I'm always fondly remembering and telling about my visits to Moscow in the Academy of Sciences, and to, you know, when the relationship between the EU and Russia was so wonderful. I celebrated the 50th anniversary of the EEC Treaty in Moscow with a conference dedicated to that in 2007. So it's a long story, and I'm so happy that this continues, and I gather more research from more colleagues. And what I find very interesting in the intersections, from my point of view, is specifically the two levels that you pointed out. So the wider picture and how the Soviet Union and its allies contributed to shaping the global governance, particularly the economic one. And I think we all agree here that this triumphalistic narrative from an American perspective in the Cold War is being quite wiped away. But if we look at the economic interest is still very much there. So I think the connections there are visible and so promising. And at the same time, I'm so much intrigued by the research that in some way, Michael, projects, your projects and Alexei's projects as well, are looking into is the inner mechanisms of it. So when Alexei talks about the production chains, I would be very much interested in, and we will discuss this further, in also trying to explore the connections with Western European business. So that's my interest moving forward. And so how that comes together at some point, because this is one of the things that we discussed already. So there is an attempt to reconceive the production chains in the Comecon space, how that combines with this borrowing from Western banks, or introducing Western technology, or trying to export, so thinking about the market they want to. That is personally what I would love to dig deeper into, and so maybe we can collaborate to bring the two research projects in, not in parallel, but discussing at every step, as much as we did with Michael in the past. So yeah, I'm very happy for today. I'm very happy to continue to follow your work and to share our research next time in presence.
We tell you, it's every online conference. We hope that next time will be in person.
Yes. It's just because there are so many things I found work very well online, like teaching is okay. It's, you know, it's not that you lose very much by not being in class. But the conferences is no, because we had the best ideas and exchanges over the coffee breaks or at dinner, and you know, toasting on vodka.
we need a conference online with a bottle, a glass of wine or a bottle of beer. So online after party, online coffee break,
yes,
like this.
and still it's not the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, hopefully with the vaccine in a year's time we will be.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone. I think it will be very useful. For me, it was very useful. So I'm full of idea, and I hope you too. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
May I ask you just one question? Could we share? So we have the mailing list, right, of the last.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah. So maybe we could share more systematically, let's say, what we're doing, and you know, the books that come out or articles that come out. And I would probably ask for your views in the future. I don't know, if I'm writing anything, I would be perhaps interested in sending you the draft and having your perspective, because this is the best way I can think of improving at least the way in which I present my research, my bit of research, and making sure that I'm plugging in the right research of your and teams or your own personal research, bringing that to be more visible, but also you know, taking into consideration levels that I'm not exploring and that may change very much what I find. So, and you know, if you want to do the same, I would be absolutely happy to read and
yeah, that's useful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Now I think we will discuss it in a few days, and we can organize it. So it's I think it's real and it's quite simple, so we can do that.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, circulate a paper or something,
yeah.
And then we can have a small workshop like we did today. That's brilliant. Even better. Okay, so thank you all of you again for your comments, because it also helps us to present the book better and to be more aware of what we miss and what we can pretend we contribute. And take care, and you know, I look forward for the next conversation.
Okay. Keep safe. Yes. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
For participating.